This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Power up your spring burn-off and savings with AIM EC Herbicide. Control the toughest weeds, plus get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.
Well, you downloaded the RealAg Radio podcast. Really appreciate that. Big news here. Before we get to today's program, Wheat Pete is on the show. We got a lot of agronomic stuff to talk about. We got to address the big news here today. Prime Minister Trudeau announcing his intention to resign as a leader of the Liberal Party, as well as the Prime Minister of Canada. We have the Parliament will be prorogued until March 24th. So all the MPs get to stay home in their constituencies and play hockey and curl and spend some time with some of the locals. Nothing's going to be happening in Ottawa, except the Liberals are going to be trying to find a new leader. And Prime Minister Trudeau, in his press conference, which is getting a lot of, I would say, interesting criticism in the sense that a lot of people that, analysts that I've listened to feel that he still, at this point, still not really recognizing his role in how we got to this point. Done a bunch of U.S. media appearances and, from farm media in the U.S. And it's interesting. I described this as a bit of a slow burn. This is in the sense that this has been a long time coming. You think back to a good part of 2024, losing some of those by-elections, those important by-elections, pretty handily to the Conservatives in places like downtown Toronto, losing a by-election. The writing's been on the wall here for a long time. The final nail in the coffin, or the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, really was the firing or the ask of resignation of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. That seemed to just open the floodgates here for members of the Liberal caucus to start to speak up and speak quite adamantly that things need to change. And Prime Minister Trudeau was not the person to lead the Liberals into the next election. So now the Liberals are going to look for a leader. The Conservatives will really, I think they do have their house in order, but they're going to be really preparing for an election that is going to be happening this spring. It's going to be interesting who puts their name forward for the Liberals. A lot of people talking about Champagne, a lot of people talking about Freeland, a lot of people talking about Carney. Christy Clark, former premier in BC, is a name that's being thrown around a lot. You got to ask yourself, we talked about this on the show a lot. Even if you had aspirations to be the leader, do you want to be the leader into this election based on the lead that the Conservatives have at this point? We're talking about a Liberal Party that may be in third, or even, I heard somebody, a political analyst, say this morning, fourth place when it comes to post-election. And think back to when Prime Minister Trudeau took over as leader of the Liberal Party. It was really in shambles. He built the party back up with a lot of help from others as well. But his brand really did build that party. And what shape is he? Is he kind of leaving it in the same shape that he found it? You kind of got to ask that, and we'll know post-election. But it's really looking that way. Of course, there's a lot of angst in Canada when it comes to the January 20th inauguration and the threat of some of these Trump tariffs, the steepness of them, and the impact that could have on the Canadian economy. And so that's why a lot of Canadians feel it should happen last fall or even last summer. The press conference that we saw here today. So we're going to have more, of course, throughout the week on RealAg Radio. Lindsay Smith will be your host tomorrow. She is putting together a lineup of guests to provide some analysis and thoughts on this. What are the impacts on agriculture, so on and so forth. And I'll be back on Wednesday. I'm going to be speaking Tuesday, tomorrow, at the Cropping Systems Conference in Kennewick, Washington. Looking forward to that. Of course, I'm giving a political update, so we're going to be talking about this as well, as there's a lot of interest from the U.S. in terms of, they just, Trudeau has a pretty strong brand, or a recognizable brand, and there's going to be a change here. How does that impact the trading relationship? It's not just Canada that has angst about what the trading relationship looks like going forward, also south of the border as well. So as far as that's concerned, we'll stop here, and we'll get to the rest of RealAg Radio. Enjoy the show.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the program. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a great part of your workday. We are glad that you're here. Oh, hey, also, people listening to the RealAg Radio podcast, big shout to you as well. And, of course, encourage you to check out the RealAg Radio podcast because many days we have an extended version for you with extended interviews, as well as sometimes a bit of a, like I would call it, a bit of a post-game show, so to speak, where we don't get to everything in the main show, and sometimes I just feel like going a little bit longer, like a sixth segment. Let's put it that way to you. Hope you had yourself a great weekend. You're still trying to get over the fact that Canada really just, again, 2 years in a row, torched it. It could be worse. You could be the Swedes. Holy moly. In 40 years, you think about how good Swedish hockey is. How many, think about the great NHL players and how many of them have been Swedes. And then the fact that they have won one gold medal in 40 years. That's called underachieving when it matters most, everybody. And you can remember Don Cherry used to make a lot of fun of Swedish hockey players, but they are good. They are good. That team was good. And boy, also reffing. Are we trying to remove every single piece of body contact out of hockey? I think we are. Ridiculous call against the Swedes in that overtime and basically giving the Finns the win. A soft goal, but I felt bad for Sweden. Canada also just falling victim to just brutal reffing. Hey, today on the show, we got Pete Johnson to be joining us as well. We're going to talk to Scott Davie. He's with Brett Young. We're going to talk about why maybe you want to think about being a forage grower, a forage seed grower. They've got a great program, and Scott Davie's going to be here to talk all about it. Well, also, if you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. We got a great week of shows for you. Tomorrow, I'll be speaking at the Cropping Systems Conference in Kennewick, Washington. Looking forward to that for sure. So if you are at the conference, make sure you say hi. And then we just there's a whole bunch of stuff rolling. January is slammed. I'm looking forward to it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we got Scott Davie from Brett Young in a product spotlight. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Farmers feed the world with an ever-growing population and less acreage to do it. Since 1946, Nature's Alpine Solutions has been providing sustainable fertility solutions for all crops. We don't just sell fertilizer, we live and work in agriculture every single day. We're the pioneers of liquid fertility, selling the Nature's brand in the U.S. and the Alpine brand in Canada. To learn more, call us at 877-265-BIO-K today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's now time for a product spotlight with Brett Young. And we're talking to Brett Young, seed production specialist, Scott Davie. Scott, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Shaun. How are you doing?
Hey, great to chat. I'm doing great, and it's great to chat with you. So,
Brett Young, one of the leaders when it comes to forage and turf seed production and sales. So forage and turf seed production isn't something that maybe a lot of Western Canadian growers know much about or consider for their individual farms. Tell us about that side of the industry and what goes on.
Yeah, you bet. Forage and turf seed production is basically just producing crops like alfalfa, ryegrasses, and fescues that we commonly use in forage and turf seed applications. But what we're doing is we're managing these crops to harvest the seed. So forages and turf grasses, they're all around us, whether that be in fields, pastures, golf courses, or lawns. And we grow the seed that makes all those possible. So it's a well-established global seed market worth billions of dollars annually. And we're certainly no stranger to that market. We've been in the forage and turf seed business here for 90 years, and we've recently done some expansions, and just these expansions obviously create opportunities for new growers to jump in.
Yeah, and speaking of those new growers, opportunities to jump in, what are some of the advantages of being a producer of forage and turf seed?
Yeah, so forage and turf seed production, it offers economic as well as agronomic and management benefits to our producers. These crops have an excellent profitability track record. We've got distinct markets that help your farm's commodity, or help manage your farm's commodity price risk. Our production contracts offer growers a guaranteed minimum without limiting upside, and also include act of God clauses in the event of a production failure. Most forage and turf seed crops help spread out your seeding and your harvest workloads. So this is a major benefit to our producers. And kind of lastly, many of these species that we're producing also help increase soil organic matter and improve soil health overall.
Scott, what kind of, what's involved in actually getting started in this? This sounds kind of enticing, I have to admit. So what do I need to be considering if I was interested? What do I need a proper rotation, or talk about some of those things?
Yeah, so it's not as scary as it sounds. Maybe I guess people are always a little bit leery of change, but the production process itself, it does vary from species to species, but generally speaking, it can take a little bit more management than your traditional crops like your cereals and your oil seeds, but it doesn't really require any specialized equipment to grow or to handle these crops. Almost any producer can do it. And further to that, we have a team of seed production specialists that provide dedicated in-field support to our growers. So basically that means we're there every step of the way, from planting to harvest, all the way up to the delivery of the harvested crop.
If growers are interested, how do they learn more about potentially producing forage and turf seed for Brett Young?
Yeah, I guess first of all, I would encourage anyone that's interested in learning more about these crops, check out our website. It's www.brettyoung.ca. Lots of info on those pages in there if you feel like cruising around and checking out some things on your own. We're also planning to host a webinar on January the 29th at 10 a.m. Central Time. So anyone wanting to learn more, sign up for that webinar, and by registering, you're going to be instantly connected with our team.
We got audience members from a pretty wide geography. Are there certain areas that you're really keen on producing more production in, or just kind of anywhere in general?
We're kind of spread out throughout Western Canada. I mean, we have reps kind of starting eastern Manitoba up into the Interlake. We go to southern Manitoba. We've got a pretty good following in kind of central, southwestern Manitoba, up into the parkland of Manitoba as well. And then extending west, like we're in Saskatchewan, we're in Alberta, and up into the Peace region of BC.
And I would have a contract, and am I paid on a per pound of clean seed basis, or how do the economics work out?
Yes, exactly. So you haul in your full production, we clean it up, and whatever goes in a clean seed bag is what you guys get paid on.
Awesome. Once again, Scott, you go to the Brett Young website, brettyoung.ca, and that's where we sign up for the webinar?
You betcha.
Awesome stuff. Scott, thanks so much for joining us here for this product spotlight.
Okay, thank you.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this.
Calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers, are you looking for a profitable addition to your farm that can deliver value beyond yield? The new Seed Omega-3 Canola Production System can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities and an active God clause. Contracts include first-in-class agronomy support and free on-farm pickup after harvest. Contracts are available now. Commit early to maximize your opportunity. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Vatterstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you to maximize your yield. To learn more, find your local dealer. You can visit vatterstad.com. Well, speaking of tillage, somebody that I know loves tillage more than anybody else in the world. It is Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Pete, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, thanks, Shaun. And you know I don't love tillage, but what's interesting is not tonight, but next week, Monday night, I get to speak to the University of Guelph Soil and Crop Club. And the topic is going to be tillage. So if any of those students are listening, they better be prepared to answer lots of questions about what does tillage do? Why do we do tillage? How does it impact the soil? Are there better ways, or how do we make this work? So when it comes to tillage, Shaun, the bottom line is as little as humanly possible to still get an excellent crop.
But appropriate when needed.
There are times when tillage is necessary. As much as I used to be Peter No-Till. Before I was Wheat Pete, I was Peter No-Till. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a big proponent in no-till, but sometimes, man, it just is hard. So there are times when, as you say, limited tillage when necessary.
Okay, well, hey, next week already, one of the highlights at the beginning of January, and it feels like it's a week later this year just because of how the calendar all falls, but it is the Ontario Ag Conference next week.
Right. No, not next week, Shaun. Tomorrow.
Is it what?
Right?
I'm mixed up in my weeks.
Tomorrow. So.
Oh, you are right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tomorrow it is.
Fun.
Yeehaw. So yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday this week at the Southwest Ag Conference, and that's part of the Ontario Ag Conference. Of course, the Ontario Ag Conference is the Southwest Ag Conference, the Mid West Ag Conference, and the Eastern Ontario Crop Conference all put together. And so we record all those sessions by the end of January. There will be, 50 sessions or something like that people can watch virtually, and there you can be part of the Ontario Ag Conference, watch it all virtually, or you can actually go in person. So Tuesday, Wednesday, we will be there in person. That's where the fun happens, where the presenters get to interact with the audience and where you can ask the hard questions. And the next 2 days, Shaun, I am going to be unbelievably busy doing that.
I can't believe I screwed that up, but that's how busy January is. You're right. Yeah, it is this week. I'm actually in Washington. I'm headed to Washington. So Tuesday, I'm speaking at Crop Systems Conference in Kennewick, Washington. It's It's a no-till organization across the PNW. You're kind of people, Pete.
Yeah. How is it that you get to talk to no-tillers and I got to go talk to all these Ontario tillage guys? Like, what's up with that?
It seems like a reversal of fortune. Well, I was at Ontario Ag Conference last year, had a great time. This year's keynote speaker, who will do a fantastic job, friend of the program, we'll call him, Mark Osperato, who led Canada in Operation Medusa in Afghanistan, and know Mark well. And he's spoken to the RealAg group privately before, and I've seen him speak on other occasions. I've actually seen him, and I went through his presentation leading up to the conference here in Ridgetown, and he's going to do a great job.
Yeah, he is our feature speaker tomorrow, and so looking forward to that. Because as you say, Mark just is a wealth of information, and really helps put some things in perspective and keep your focus. I don't know, targeted the way that you need to target it on the task, but also understanding the human side of it, which is a really nice mix, if you will. And then on Wednesday, our feature speaker is Machinery Pete. So,
great,
should be fun, right?
Yeah, great guy. You got to load it up. Machinery Pete is like that dude's a celebrity. Like he goes to a farm show, farm conference. I've been around him at a farm show, and the people that flock to him, and he's such a great man. Like he is the most kind, genuine person, and he'll do a great job too. And he's gonna have a better story for producers this year in comparison to the past, because prices, farmers, we talk about cutting costs. That's an area that farmers are definitely doing, is in the machinery market.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that, I think new equipment sales are kind of showing that, right, Shaun? And not looking like that may pick up in the short term. Hopefully it does. Crop prices have come back a bit, but I don't know. The outlook is not all that positive for profitability in 2025. And actually, I'm getting all sorts of requests, Shaun, to talk about that topic, profitability in 2025. How do we maintain profit in tight economic times? So that seems to be a hot button issue out in the countryside.
Don't plant a crop; just live off the interest from your GICs. Is that what you're telling people?
Well, I guess if they're like you and have lots of GICs, that could work, Shaun. If they're like me and have no GICs, they better plant a crop, and they better figure out how to do it, and at least have a few dollars left over at the end.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this from a cost cutting perspective. We've definitely seen that farmers are more in tune with cost cutting for the 25 crop, maybe in comparison to say 22 or 23 for sure. But at the end of the day, Pete, one of the things that you and I were talking about during the commercial break is what really changes, because it comes down to the right decisions from a management standpoint. We're still chasing yield. Like, it's not like, in tough times like this, the best thing for me would be to cut yield by 25 or 30% intentionally. That's not reality. Mother Nature will have a say in that anyway. But from a management perspective, what really changes?
So Shaun, I think that's a really awesome question. And I don't know, as I'm preparing for these presentations, I almost want to back up and say, what does change? Because did you not try to grow the crop you grew in 2024 and the crop you grew in 2023 with the most profit possible? And so things change a little bit as fertilizer prices in relation to crop prices. So you can get minor variances. But what's really interesting is if you do the math on that, the amount that it changes is maybe 15 pounds of nitrogen per acre out of 150, right? Like, it's not like we go from 150 pound or whatever that number is, application of nitrogen, down to 100 pound. If you do that, you are going to lose money big time because you hurt your yield too much. And so it's kind of funny because I've had different people throw different thought processes out to me. And so the one is the only way to manage low prices is to grow more bushels. And it's kind of like, well, okay, but didn't I try to grow more bushels in 2024? And so how do I do it differently in 2025? And the other adage is you cannot save your way to profitability. And so I think both of those are true, but in terms of what do you do differently, those are really fine tuning things. And as you go through that thought process, like, I don't know, there are ways you can cut. If you've done a good job on soil fertility, if you built that phosphorus and potash bank account up when you had better profitability, you can reduce those costs or those inputs for 2025 and be more profitable. But you can't reduce those inputs for 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, because eventually that bank account gets drawn down and then you take less yield. So it's a really fine line on trying to reduce those inputs. You talk about weed control, man, if you don't do a good job of weed control, 1 year's seeding is 7 years weeding is the old adage, and however you want to take that. But if you let those weeds go to seed, that's 100% bad. So even on the equipment end, we can say, all right, we're not going to buy new equipment this year because we don't have the profitability, and that's fine. But that combine, now you're going to put another, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever that number of acres is through it. And equipment doesn't last forever. And so that combine now has depreciated another year. It's got another 5,000 acres on it. So its resale value is that much less. So the next time you upgrade that piece of machinery, it's a bigger chump, right? Like you've just got a lot more dollars you got to bring to that table. So all of these things are not a 1 year wonder. And I really think that it's a more complex answer, and there's no easy solution. Heck, if there's an easy solution, they wouldn't ask me to talk about it.
Okay, so let's just, I think of it this way. So risk and probabilities. So the one risk that we have that is a large risk, probably our biggest risk, but we have no control over it, is weather. Okay, so let's just take weather and just park it to the side for a second. When we look at the risks that we have that are based on decisions that we're making, doesn't what changes come down to you may remove some of the things you were doing that, one, you're not sure about the return, or the probability of a high that bet or that decision leading to a big change is actually less, or like you're removing some of those bets. Does that make sense? Like some would say you're getting back to the basics, but I don't want to phrase it that way, because it's more, okay, I did this. I think I could get like a 15 bushel bump, right? Well, but in 4 or 5 years, I'm maybe getting 2. And I'm not sure about if it's worth that kind of a bet in a year like this. That's the kind of decisions that I'm wondering if that's what changes this year.
And I think Shaun, you're absolutely correct in terms of swinging for the fences. So
yeah,
I'm going to swing for the fences because I'm profitable enough that if I only get the 2 bushels, not the 15, well, I'm still going to be in business. Whereas in 2025, if I swing for the fences and I spend that $50 on whatever that is, additional nitrogen, an added fungicide, a biological, whatever, and I only get 2 bushels, well, that's $10 and I spent 50, and that $40 is my entire profit for the year.
Right.
So I think that's correct. I also think you're 100% correct that growers will pull back on the things that they're less sure about.
Yeah.
So we're pretty unsure on a lot of biologicals, and the people I talk to are saying we're going to be careful around biologicals, which is too bad, because I think biologicals, the only way we learn about them and we find the ones that are going to drive the next the next move forward is we have to keep trialing them. We have to keep looking at them. But some biologicals are stress relievers and they work 1 year in 5. And so 1 year in 5 is not a consistent enough return under a tough economic year.
Right. But if you've had good luck with, say, a biological product, if we're going to pick on biologicals for a second, if you've had, where you've seen good results 3 of the last 4, I like use them.
Absolutely.
That's the problem here when we're talking like in generalities in terms of like, oh, people, we have it. And I've talked about this where, people are going to cut back on this. They're going to, cut back on that. But you got to look at your own situation. If you've been getting the results and the returns for that decision, the majority, say 3 of the past 4, 4 of the past 5, 2 of the past 3, whatever it is, don't remove that because it's netting you a positive outcome.
Yeah, 100%. And the challenge is, have you done the trials to actually know?
Well, there's a problem.
Right?
Debbie Downer over here. Hey, Pete, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
Ready to take your oat game to the next level? Try CDC Endure from Alliance Seed. CDC Endure oats are consistently one of the top yielding varieties in the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta provincial yield trials. With strong standability, excellent disease resistance, and excellent end-use quality, CDC Endure might be the variety for you and your farm. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers. For more information, visit allianceseed.com.
Lima Grain Cereal Seed brings you best-in-class performance for winter and spring wheat, including 12 national wheat yield contest winners in 2024. With the most extensive coaxium portfolio and over 15 top-performing varieties, Lima Grain delivers superior genetics to control grassy weeds when you need it, fall or spring. Boost your yield potential today. Visit limagraincerealseeds.com or call your LCS Regional Commercial Manager for more info. Okay, I may have been confused when the Ontario Ag Conference is. It is this week. But what I do know for sure is coming up the end of January is the Crossroads Conference. It's happening January 28th and 29th in Edmonton. Crossroads is designed to empower attendees with cutting-edge insights, technological advancements, and sustainable practices crucial for modern farming. You can future-proof your farm and get tickets at crossroadscropconference.ca. That's crossroadscropconference.ca. Well, Pete and I always have a good conversation during the commercial breaks, and he takes major issue with something that I said. Pete, what was it? What sort of triggered you?
So Shaun, you said in the last segment that the biggest factor that we have no control over, so we're just going to set it entirely aside in terms of crop profitability, is weather. And I just want to say, wait just a minute, because we can't control the weather, but believe it or not, we do have some pretty significant management impacts on how much that weather will affect our yield. And so I don't think we can just say, take it off the table. I think what we have to say is weather is always an issue. So from a profitability standpoint, whether it's in a profitable year in 2024 or 2023, whenever that was, because I think there was a fair number of growers, at least in the US, that did not have a good year in 2024. Saw a tweet from a Nebraska grower that basically said, we are shutting everything down.
I saw that.
Yeah, like really unfortunate. So, but whatever that profitability was, but when you look at the impacts of weather, the one thing that growers just don't seem to want to admit is that rotation has a massive impact on how resilient your soil is under adverse weather conditions. And so this is true. There's studies in Ontario, there's studies in California, there's studies in, I forget all, but I think there's 11 different locations, one of which was in Nebraska. And what's really interesting is that if you're in a good rotation where you're actually including crops in the rotation that do a better job of maintaining good soil health, whatever that is, because it's so hard to measure. And we could have a real discussion about, crop sequencing in the rotation. And it's not just rotation diversity. Some people say diversity. It's not just rotation diversity. It's the actual crop sequence in that diversity that also matters.
Right.
Right? But if you are in that game, you would get a dry year, a hot, dry year, and you can change the yield of the corn crop you're growing by 20 to 30% just by being in a good rotation versus being continuous corn.
Yep.
And so when you say profitability, and that's when I talk give these presentations, that's going to be one of the things that I talk about, because you can consistently increase crop yield by 7%, maybe 10%, just by having a good rotation. And what happens in that situation is, so I increase my corn yield by 7%. Well, on the 5-year average, that is going to increase my profitability. But on the 1-year look, growers only say, well, that's 7% more corn. I don't spread that 7% increase in yield. I don't give any credit to that rotation. I just give it to the corn crop. So the corn crop's more profitable. I'm going to grow corn on corn. Well, I throw that 7% yield out the window. And man, if you're growing 200 bushel corn, that's 14 bushel per acre, and 14 bushel per acre at $5, just to use a number, that's $70. So that's $70 that is either profit or reduced loss that you're not going to get if you don't maintain that good rotation. So Shaun, you want to set weather totally aside, and I want to say, no, as a grower, I actually can impact how much that weather risk means in my profitability picture.
That's fair. I think you've hit a home run here on this sequencing, because you think about it. Okay, so over the last 10 years, I got crop diversity, got 50% corn, 50% beans, right? But it was five years in a row, and then 5 years in a row. That's not, that's we got to be careful with the numbers, right? I love college football, so let's use a football analogy. It's like run versus pass in your offense, right? It's the sequencing that matters, and how what you did the prior play actually sets up the next play, right? And so let's just use the example of play action pass, right?
Yep.
Run, pass, run, pass, right? And you what you're trying to, everyone, people are watching, you're like, they keep on running for 2 yards. What are they doing? Right? What, they're not getting any yards on the run. Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to suck up those safeties, right? So that they fake the run, and then the pass is much more effective. Once that pass starts to be more effective in the sequencing, the safeties move back, less pass rush, more defensive backs trying to protect that pass. Then all of a sudden the run opens up, and your run is more effective, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so in football, it's sort of keeping the defense off guard, right? What is it? Is it going to be a pass? Is it going to be run? So that's why that sequencing, you got to mix it up and whatnot. It's essentially the same in crop production. You want to make sure that you're keeping that soil fed with a vast array of different crop residues, because that seems to matter. And that, I mean, gosh, the perfect example is you grow corn after canola, and you can have an absolute disaster. It doesn't always happen, but canola is non-mycorrhizal. Corn is highly mycorrhizal. And so there's no mycorrhiza in the soil, and now the corn goes phosphorus deficient. Whereas if you grow wheat after canola, it's the exact opposite. You grow wheat after canola, you actually get a 3 or 4%, I forget the exact number, but you get higher yield than you would in growing wheat after many other crops. So do you want corn in the rotation? Absolutely. Do you want wheat in the rotation? Absolutely. If all you do is grow canola wheat, you are definitely going to be less profitable, because you're not going to max out the yield benefit that you can get by growing canola after a different crop. And I'd have to look at, I don't remember the table well enough to say what that crop is, Shaun, but that data exists and it matters.
And again, what you do this year is not only about this year, but it's setting up next year, that next play. We're going to do this so that, we're effectively making next year's decision a higher probability of success.
And not only next year, Shaun, but in some cases, 2 years out.
Right.
Right. And even in some cases, you can have impact as much as 5 years out, which you kind of go, wow, how can that be? But we see that all the time, that we can have impact. I mean, the biggest impact typically is the year right after. But in some cases, Ontario data, and it's wheat peat, so you know where I'm going, but you put wheat in the rotation.
Bias.
What it's what the data says. You put wheat in the rotation in Ontario, you get 5% more corn yield the year after. You get 11% more soybean yield the second year after the wheat.
So here's the thing. I think people in the plains and in the prairies are better at this than in the Corn Belt and in Ontario, because we have more crop options. We're growing more crop types. Are we not?
Okay. So I think you have more opportunity, Shaun, but that doesn't mean you're better at it.
Yeah, okay.
Because in some cases, right, if you grow the crops in the wrong sequence, you actually can reduce your yield. So instead of getting, the 100% average, there are situations where you can cut that back to 91% and you rotated, right? You went from, I don't know, lentils to canola, and don't say that's the, like, again, I
know.
I don't have that memorized, but there are situations where that's the wrong sequencing, even though it's rotation, and you take 8-10% less yield. So are you better at it? Maybe, but you have to pay attention to the data. You definitely have more opportunity. So take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, so why is this an issue still? If we know all this, why is this such an issue? Do we not have adequate data to prove it? Do we not communicate it very well? Does in the moment economics trump everything? What's the gap?
So there's no question that in the moment economics are the thing that drive most decisions. And when I talk about putting wheat in the rotation in Ontario, even though you get those yield gains, that they look at wheat and say, man, wheat's making me no money this year. I can't afford to grow it. And so they take it out of the rotation, and then their corn becomes not profitable. But it takes 2 or 3 years for that change to happen. So they don't see that. I think the other thing, Shaun, is that there isn't a whack of this data, and a lot of the sequencing data for Western Canada that I'm aware of comes out of MAS, the Manitoba Ag Services Corporation or Committee, or whatever the C stands for, and so they just, when they get their yields come in, they know what the previous crop is, and they look at the aggregate yield, and they can predict, because it's such a massive data set, what crops follow other crops better. But there is very little actual research into long-term sequencing of crop mixes to sort that out. And so there isn't as much information out there as you think, and short-term economics really play. I mean, if the price of yellow peas goes through the roof, and it looks like the profitable crop, even though you grew lentils there the year previous and you're going to take 90% yield, you don't see that. And you say, well, my average pea yield is a ton, and so that's profitable. I'll grow it. But you grow it after lentils, you don't get a ton. You get 0.9 of a ton, and all of a sudden it's break even at best. So we don't factor that in when we make those decisions.
Fair. And you can see why, though. Like that's not a point of being critical. You could see why.
I get it 100%. You got, yeah, absolutely.
Especially in a year like, jumping back to where we started here, profitability. It's in like the 25 crop where it really runs into a sort of like hitting a light pole.
Right. I mean, you can say grow wheat because it's going to help me in 26 and 27. But if I go bankrupt in 25,
doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. And so that short-term economics is the biggest driver, and it's hard to look beyond that.
Hey, in the beef business, we had Ann Wasco on the show on Friday, and we're talking about increasing the cow herd, and this is exactly it. Is I would love to retain more heifers, but honestly, prices are so good right now, and we've had so many years of poor prices. I'm not retaining. I'm selling. I gotta restock the bank account. I gotta get some cash flow. I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity. Now, if these prices happen over a more sustained period of time, then I'm in a more comfortable situation. I can afford to place the bet on retaining heifers and thinking a little bit more long term. So it doesn't just work in the cropping sector; it works in the livestock sector too. And it's not about being critical. It's the realities of running a business, right?
100%. And all of us, every human remembers what happened yesterday way better than we remember what happened 10 years ago, right, Shaun?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that short term, and it's hard to get away from.
I want to talk about rooting depth. Can you hang around for a short segment next?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we'll keep him around. I know. I had other plans, but
I feel sorry for everybody.
We will make it work. Hey, you're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius.
What's next doesn't happen by accident, doesn't happen by chance.
What's next happens when experience meets expertise, when data meets dollars, and when steel meets earth.
What's next happens when the promising work of Pioneer's state-of-the-art research centers meets the unsparing challenges of more than 17,000 on-farm trials.
Our ultimate goal is to bring the next seed breakthrough to your field.
Because Pioneer isn't just our name.
It's our mission. Pioneer.
What's next
happens here.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147. Shaun Haney, joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Hey, trust Alliance Seed to provide the expertise and information needed to match the right seed to your farm's unique potential. Every seed starts a story at Alliance Seed. Start your success story by visiting allianceseed.com. Okay, Pete, I wanted to talk about root depth. And we've talked a lot about roots and the root profile when we talk about cover crops and things like that. But are there things that we can do to increase the depth of the root, especially when we're tight on moisture? Now, perk up here, Western Canada, because we're always dealing with this situation. Are there things that we can do?
Yeah, and so what's really there's been some neat work done out of the Maritimes, and so their YEN program, their Yield Enhancement Network program, they actually, because in that process we look at yield potential, and part of yield potential is available water, and a lot of every foot of soil should be 2 inches of available water, depending on soil type and whatnot. But that's just an easy number, and in that program, they basically look at 1.5 meters of rooting depth. And so the thought process was, well, let's actually dig the roots up and see. And what's really interesting, Shaun, is that there was not a good correlation between wheat yield and how deep they found roots. And you kind of go, wow, so what's going on there? And then we look at the Ontario, the Great Lakes YEN data, and we have a grower who got 155% of his yield potential. Like, that's not possible. So it looked like he was water limited. Clearly, he is not water limited. And so you kind of say, what is going on with rooting depth, with water movement in the soil? And is there anything we can do about it? So some great German research, and they've had this same problem. And part of it, Shaun, and we probably don't have time to get into all the depth of it, but man, compaction matters in this rooting depth game and water movement in the soil. And I think in Germany, they have been fighting compaction pretty significantly, but they're looking at ways to get better root growth rather at depth. So they actually go in and they inject manure at depth to try to increase the organic matter and to get more nutrients there, but also to increase the biological activity and to increase the water flow to the roots. And they could have a pretty significant positive impact on all of those root features. And they did get a yield increase, but it's pretty tough to make it cost effective. And then you think about, is it just a lot about the inherent capability of that subsoil to move water through capillary action to the roots? And here's why I say that, Shaun. When we do root digs, I can find wheat roots 5 feet deep. And as soon as I find a wheat root 5 foot depth, people are saying, oh, we're pulling water from 1.5 meters from 5 feet. Well, yeah, but that's one root that I find in a lot of volume of soil. Whereas if I go in the top 4 inches, I've got this massive amount of roots in that top 4 inches. So I'm exploring the full root or the full volume of soil, right? Like all of that water's getting there. That one root at 5 foot depth, it's pulling water up. But man, if the water at that 5 foot level isn't moving to the root, if I don't have good capillary action for that to move to that root, yeah, it's pulling a wee little bit of water, but it's not getting very much.
So if there's an adequate amount of moisture, say in that first foot, okay.
Yep.
Isn't the plant wasting energy trying to pull it from 5?
So if there's adequate moisture in the top foot and there's adequate nutrients, you probably won't see much root growth past that 1 foot depth.
So in your example, why did we have a root that was just
5 foot depth? Because at some point in that situation, we got a dry period.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't care where you go in the world, almost everywhere, at some point during the crop's growth, you encounter some level of moisture stress, right?
So are we better off then have adequate moisture at the beginning, launch the crop out of the ground evenly and as quickly as possible? Then we have a period of adversity to establish those roots to go as low as possible, and then Mother Nature cooperates, and then we have adequate moisture again.
Yeah. So absolutely, we want it dry, not desert dry, but
right.
We want to be a little bit moisture stressed through that rapid growth stage of the crop, because then it will send its roots deeper and access some of that deeper moisture. And then once we get into grain fill, to have adequate moisture, so that, because once you get into grain fill, the plant doesn't generate many more new roots, right? And so if you're wet right up to anthesis and you don't get deep roots, and then it goes dry, that's when you get the unmitigated disaster. So you want to have some limited moisture stress, just enough to get that crop to put its roots down deep so it has access to deep moisture if it does go dry through that grain fill period. If you get perfect moisture through the grain fill period, you didn't need those deep roots.
Right.
But man, remember how much water that crop is pulling through the grain fill period. It's often like you use an inch of water every 3 days or every 4 days. So when you say adequate moisture, that's a lot of moisture that you need to have fall to never need that deep subsoil moisture, that stored moisture.
So this early adversity on the crop is similar to raising your kids, right? You want them to be born, they're established, but you want them to have periods of adversity to create those life experience roots so that later on in life, they can use some of those experience and they've set themselves up to have success later on. What you don't want is where they face, and this is kind of what happens nowadays, no adversity. And then all of a sudden they're like 30 and they face some adversity. It's like, I don't know how to cope with it. Like this is crazy. I don't know what to do. I have no skills. I have no I have no roots. Is that not super similar?
So it's a good analogy, Shaun. And I do think that there's lots of kids that face adversity growing up and learn some of those skills. So when you say that's what, the 30-year-old kid has no skills, that may be true of some children, some adults, but it's
like how you've
not
become
true
the
of all.
disclaimer on the program now.
No, I guess I just don't want everybody to leave saying that humanity is in dire straits because
there are plenty of kids that are kept in a bubble. Let's be honest. Not all, but there are plenty.
Yep, absolutely.
Maybe not the farm kids of the audience, but I'm
so one last. I just want to. You keep saying adversity, Shaun. I want to say moisture stress. I don't like the frost is also adversity, right?
Yeah,
so be careful with just adversity. It's a specific stress, and probably the same with our kids. We want them to be a bit stressed so they learn discipline and they learn study skills and they learn a bunch of the skills they need. We don't want them to get hit by a car.
Right. Like, absolutely. There's different kinds of it. Yeah. Adversity is on a wide scale.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. We don't want the stem snapping off because the wind was blowing 150 kilometers an hour.
Yeah. That's a whole bad level of adversity that there ain't no recovering from, Shaun.
Yeah. So, hey, we got to finish up here, but just checking your root depth. Is there the benefits to that then? Having like a lot of people with pulse crops will look, pull up roots and look at nodulation effectiveness, things like that. But say on your wheat or your canola, benefits to digging up some plants and looking at the root depth?
Yeah, because it tells you about compaction. It tells you about the impact of your tillage practices. Are you going to dig 5 feet to look for a root? I don't think so, because there's very little you can do from a management standpoint there anyway. But digging down a foot, right? Digging down a foot and seeing if you have compaction, that matters.
Son, why do you have the backhoe out in the middle of the canola field, digging up those 5-foot roots, trying to see if they're there? How about we don't do that? I think we've asked them. You talk about compaction. I think of like the snowfall on my driveway. It drives me crazy. I go wheat Pete nuts when the kids pull out of the driveway after a fresh snow without shoveling it, because there's that one pass creates a whole bunch of compaction that impacts my effectiveness of ability to shovel that walk as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I have the same problem, Shaun. Like if you shovel it before you drive on it, it just works better.
Hey, Pete, like 80% of the compaction happens on that first pass, Pete.
Look at you, Dr. Agronomist Haney. Holy gosh.
If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Pete, have a great time on Ontario Ag Conference. I'm going to have a great time at the Cropping Systems Conference in Washington, and we'll connect next week and see how we both made out, okay?
Yeah, 100%. You tell those no-tillers in Washington that it's a good thing. Keep doing it.
I'm actually going to tell them all about Wheat Pete's word. I have a specific slide just on Wheat Pete's word, Pete.
Oh, very cool. I appreciate that. Cool.
Best I could do. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Fast-acting AIM EC Herbicide is the go-to tank mix for the hottest spring burn-off of the toughest weeds. Plus, get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.